The gates of Duskmoor Academy groaned open before Daniel Marsh had even finished reading the letter in his hand, and somewhere behind those gates, something enormous let out a sound that was not quite a growl and not quite a laugh. Daniel froze on the gravel path, his backpack sliding off one shoulder, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. He had expected a normal boarding school, old stone buildings, strict teachers, maybe a uniform he would hate. He had not expected the trees lining the driveway to have eyes that blinked when he passed them, or for the wind to smell like copper and pine smoke at the same time. A tall woman in a dark green coat stood waiting at the entrance, her posture too straight, her eyes too still, the kind of stillness that reminded Daniel of a predator watching prey decide which direction to run. She introduced herself as Professor Grace Ellis, the Academy's head of admissions, and she looked at Daniel the way someone might look at a puzzle piece that had been forced into the wrong box. "You are Daniel Marsh," she said, not really a question. "That's me," Daniel answered, trying to sound confident even though his hands were shaking. "I got the acceptance letter. I still don't totally understand what kind of school this is, but my family needed me somewhere else, and this was the only offer I got, so here I am." Grace studied him for a long moment. Something about his sent registration file did not sit right with her, but the enrollment crystal in the main office had confirmed him 3 separate times, and the crystal had never been wrong in over 200 years. She decided to keep her doubts to herself for now, and let him inside. The moment Daniel stepped through the doors, every head in the grand entrance hall turned toward him. Students lined the marble staircases and balconies above, some with sharp claws resting casually on the railings, some with eyes that glowed faintly gold or silver, some with skin that shimmered like it belonged to something with scales underneath. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Daniel smiled awkwardly and gave a small wave, completely unaware that every single person staring at him was doing sensory math, trying to place his scent into a category of predator and failing to find one that fit. A boy near the top of the staircase leaned toward his friend and whispered just loud enough for the sound to travel. "What is that?" His friend, a girl with sharp amber eyes and hair the color of dark honey, tilted her head and inhaled slowly. "I don't know. It smells like nothing, like plain air with a heartbeat." Daniel heard none of this. He was too busy staring up at the ceiling, which seemed to shift and ripple like water, showing constellations that did not match any night sky he had ever seen. Grace led him down a long corridor lined with portraits of Academy graduates, each one more intimidating than the last. Some portraits had wings folded behind broad shoulders. Some had teeth bared in proud, permanent smiles. Daniel tried not to stare too hard, but he could not help noticing that not a single portrait looked remotely human. "This school," Daniel finally asked, "it's for people with, like, special abilities, right? Like enhanced senses or something?" Grace paused at a set of double doors before opening them. "You could say that." Inside was a smaller office, warm with lamplight, where an older man with silver hair and unsettlingly calm eyes sat behind a heavy wooden desk. This was Professor Alaric Vane, the headmaster of Duskmoor Academy, and the founder of its Predator training program, a curriculum designed over centuries to teach the most dangerous young creatures in the world how to hunt, how to dominate, and how to survive among their own kind, without destroying each other in the process. Alaric studied Daniel with the patience of someone who had seen thousands of new students walk through that door, but none who smelled quite like this one. "Daniel Marsh," he said slowly, "born in a quiet town, no history of supernatural lineage in any registry we could find. And yet the enrollment crystal placed you here, among apex predators, as though you belonged." Daniel blinked. Apex predators? Like actual predators? As in animals that hunt other animals? As in shapeshifters, Alaric said simply. Dragon heirs, wolf packs. Ancient bloodlines that have hunted since before written history. Every student in this academy carries something dangerous inside them. Every student except, it seems, you. For a moment, Daniel almost laughed, thinking this was some elaborate prank designed to scare new students. But the seriousness in Alaric's expression, combined with everything he had already seen since walking through the gates, made the laugh die quietly in his throat. "So there's been a mistake," Daniel said carefully. "I shouldn't be here." Alaric folded his hands on the desk. "Enrollment law is very old, and very strict at this academy. Once the crystal accepts a student, that student cannot be removed without documented cause, and a mysterious scent signature is not sufficient cause under current regulations. Until we determine what you actually are, Daniel Marsh, you remain a fully enrolled student of Duskmoor Academy. Grace shifted uncomfortably beside him. She could already imagine how this would go. A boy who could not shift, could not fight, could not even properly defend himself against the youngest predator students, walking the same halls as heirs bred for centuries to hunt. Daniel, meanwhile, felt something strange stirring beneath his fear. Not confidence exactly, but a stubborn refusal to be intimidated by things he did not yet understand. He had grown up dealing with far worse dangers than mysterious teachers and shifting ceilings, and something in him decided, almost instinctively, that he would rather stay and figure this place out than run back to the life he had left behind. "All right," Daniel said, surprising even himself. "I'll stay. I'll figure out what's going on." Alaric's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with quiet curiosity, as though Daniel had just done something no ordinary human ever did in front of him without flinching. Grace escorted Daniel to his assigned dormitory wing, warning him along the way about basic academy etiquette. Never make direct, prolonged eye contact with a Wolfpack student during their first week. It read as a challenge. Never approach a Dragonblood student while they were eating. Their instincts around food were unpredictable. Never wander the lower training grounds after dark. Some of the more feral bloodlines practiced hunting drills there, and were known to forget the difference between drill and reality. Daniel absorbed every warning with wide eyes, nodding along, silently promising himself he would follow every single rule to the letter. His dorm room was simple, with a narrow bed, a wooden desk, and a window overlooking a courtyard where several students were sparring, using abilities Daniel had never imagined were real. One boy transformed his arm into a blur of shifting scales, before slashing at a training dummy, reducing it to splinters in seconds. A girl nearby let out a controlled roar that visibly cracked the stone beneath her feet. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, staring out that window for a long time, trying to process the fact that he was now living among creatures capable of doing that kind of damage without even trying hard. A knock came at his door. When he opened it, a boy stood there with dark hair, striking green eyes, and an easy, confident smile that did not quite reach those eyes. He introduced himself as Liam Ashford, heir to one of the Academy's most respected dragon bloodlines, and explained that he had been assigned as Daniel's welcome guide for his first week. "You're the human everyone's talking about," Liam said, leaning casually against the doorframe, his gaze flicking over Daniel like he was evaluating a stray animal that had wandered into the wrong territory. "Word travels fast around here." "I guess word travels faster than I expected," Daniel said, trying to match Liam's casual tone even though his stomach twisted with nerves. Liam's smile widened, sharp at the edges. "Word of advice, human. Keep your head down for the first few weeks. Trials start soon, and trials here are not exactly gentle. A lot of students are going to want to know exactly what you're made of, and not all of them will ask nicely." Daniel forced himself to hold Liam's gaze, even though every instinct told him to look away. "Thanks for the warning. I'll keep that in mind." Liam studied him a moment longer, something flickering behind his green eyes that almost looked like curiosity, before he pushed off the doorframe and sauntered away down the hall, leaving Daniel alone, with his racing heart and a growing, uneasy certainty that his first week at Duskmoor Academy was going to be far more dangerous than any ordinary first day of school had any right to be. That night, Daniel lay awake listening to distant howls echo across the training grounds, wondering exactly what kind of trials Liam had been talking about, and wondering, with a small flicker of stubborn determination beneath his fear, whether he actually had what it took to survive them. Outside his window, unseen in the shadows of the courtyard, a pair of golden eyes watched his dark window for a long moment, before disappearing silently into the night, already calculating exactly how the newest, strangest student at Duskmoor Academy might be tested first. Morning came too fast. A sharp bell echoed through the dormitory halls at dawn, and Daniel jolted awake to the sound of doors slamming and eager voices calling out about the start of orientation trials. He dressed quickly, pulling on the plain gray training uniform left folded at the foot of his bed, and stepped out into a hallway buzzing with excitement and barely restrained aggression. Students pushed past him, some deliberately bumping his shoulder hard enough to make him stumble, testing to see how he would react. Daniel kept his expression calm, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him rattled, even though his pulse thundered in his ears. At the end of the hallway, a girl with sharp amber eyes and dark honey hair blocked his path, arms crossed, studying him with open suspicion. This was Ivy Sinclair, daughter of one of the oldest Wolfpack families ever admitted to Duskmore Academy, and she had heard every rumor circulating about the strange new human student. "You're the mistake everyone's talking about," Ivy said bluntly, no attempt at politeness in her tone. "I've been called worse in the last 12 hours, Daniel replied, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. Ivy's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of grudging interest crossing her face before she masked it again. "Orientation trials start in an hour, predators only. No exceptions, no special treatment, no mercy. If the crystal says you belong here, then you'll prove it out there like everyone else, or you'll learn very quickly why humans don't usually last long around apex predators." She turned and walked away without waiting for a response, leaving Daniel standing alone in the crowded hallway, surrounded by creatures far more dangerous than anything he had ever imagined facing, with only 1 hour left before he would have to prove, somehow, that he deserved to survive among them. The training grounds stretched out behind the academy, like a wild forest trapped inside invisible walls, filled with jagged rocks, twisted trees, and a thick mist that curled low across the uneven ground. Dozens of students gathered at the edge of the tree line, murmuring among themselves, most of them glancing toward Daniel, with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. Professor Alaric Vane stood at the front of the group, his calm presence somehow cutting through the tension in the air. Beside him stood Grace Ellis, arms folded, watching Daniel with quiet concern she tried not to show. "Orientation trials exist for one purpose," Alaric announced, his voice carrying easily across the clearing, without him needing to raise it. "To measure instinct, adaptability, and survival under pressure. Today's exercise is simple. Reach the tower at the center of the grounds before sundown. The forest itself will test you. Other students may test you as well, though direct harm outside sanctioned combat remains strictly forbidden." A ripple of quiet laughter passed through some of the older students, the kind of laughter that suggested rules like that were more guideline than law, once teachers were out of sight. "Partnerships are permitted but not required," Alaric continued. "Choose your approach wisely." The students began moving toward the tree line in small clusters, already forming temporary alliances, some purely strategic, some clearly designed to isolate weaker students for easy intimidation. Daniel noticed more than one predator glancing his way, with an expression that promised trouble the moment they were alone in the mist. Liam appeared at his side, arms crossed, his earlier friendliness replaced by something more calculating. "Sticking with me might be your safest option today, human. A lot of students out there are hoping to get you alone." Daniel considered this for a moment, weighing the offer against the memory of Liam's sharp smile the night before. Something told him Liam's motivations were not purely protective. "Why would you want to help me?" "Curiosity," Liam admitted with a shrug. "I want to see what you actually do out there, before anyone decides you're worth hunting properly." Before Daniel could respond, Ivy stepped up beside them, her expression unreadable. "I'm coming too. Someone needs to make sure this doesn't turn into an actual disaster, before the first trial even ends." The three of them entered the mist together, the noise of the other students fading quickly behind them, as the forest swallowed the sound. Daniel kept his senses sharp, noticing details the others seemed to overlook entirely, the way certain patches of ground looked disturbed, the way shadows moved unnaturally between the trees, the way the mist thickened near specific clusters of rock formations. "This place is designed to disorient anyone relying purely on scent and instinct," Daniel said quietly, more to himself than to his companions. Ivy glanced at him sharply. "What makes you say that?" "Because the mist smells like it's coming from somewhere specific, not naturally rising from the ground," Daniel explained. "And it's thickest exactly where the terrain gets easiest to walk through. That's not an accident. Someone designed this course to punish creatures that trust their noses more than their eyes." Liam raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "You noticed all that already?" "I notice things," Daniel said simply. "It's kind of the only advantage I've got here." They continued deeper into the forest, and Daniel's observations proved correct again and again. Where other groups blundered into confusing scent trails and false paths, Daniel guided Liam and Ivy around obvious traps using nothing but careful observation and simple logic. A group of students ahead of them wandered directly into a patch of ground that suddenly gave way beneath their feet, dropping them into a shallow pit, lined with harmless but startling illusions, designed to simulate a predator ambush. Daniel had noticed the slightly uneven color of that patch of earth from 30 feet away, and steered his group wide around it. "You're better at this than you should be," Ivy admitted grudgingly, as they climbed over a fallen tree trunk. "Most predators rely entirely on instinct during trials like this. You're relying on something else completely." "I don't have instinct like you do," Daniel said. "So I have to use everything else I've got instead." They pressed onward, and the terrain grew rougher, the mist thicker, until they reached a wide clearing, where several predator students from a rival group stood waiting, clearly having anticipated exactly where weaker travelers would be forced to pass. Among them stood a tall, broad-shouldered boy with cold gray eyes and an unmistakable air of cruelty, a senior student named Marcus Cade, notorious throughout the academy for his brutal reputation during past trials. "Well, well," Marcus said, stepping forward with a slow, predatory grin. "The human decided to actually show up today." Ivy immediately stepped slightly in front of Daniel, her posture shifting into something more defensive. "Back off, Marcus. This isn't sanctioned combat." "Relax," Marcus said, holding up his hands with mock innocence. "I just want to see what the mistake can actually do. Call it academic curiosity." He nodded toward two of his companions, who moved to flank Daniel from either side, clearly intending to corner him regardless of what rules technically forbid. Daniel felt his pulse spike, but he forced himself to stay calm, scanning the clearing quickly, noting the loose rocks scattered near his feet, the low-hanging branch just behind Marcus's group, the slight incline of the ground that would favor anyone moving quickly downhill. "You really don't want to do this," Daniel said, keeping his voice steady, despite the fear tightening his chest. Marcus laughed, low and mocking. "And why not?" "Because you're standing exactly where I'd want you standing if I actually needed to get past you," Daniel said. Marcus's smile faltered for just a moment, confusion flickering behind his cold eyes, and in that brief instant of hesitation, Daniel moved. He grabbed a loose branch from the ground and hurled it hard toward the low-hanging limb behind Marcus, startling a small flock of roosting birds into explosive flight, directly into the faces of Marcus's flanking companions. In the chaos of flapping wings and surprised shouting, Daniel grabbed Ivy's arm and bolted downhill, using the incline to gain speed instantly, Liam sprinting close behind them. Marcus's furious shout echoed through the mist as he and his companions scrambled to recover, but by the time they regained their bearings, Daniel, Ivy, and Liam had already put a significant distance between themselves and the clearing, disappearing deeper into the twisting forest paths. "That was insane," Liam said between breaths, as they finally slowed near a small stream. "You just used birds as a weapon against Marcus Cade." "I used the environment," Daniel corrected, still catching his breath himself, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I don't have claws or fangs or wings. All I have is figuring out how to use everything around me before someone else does." Ivy stared at him for a long moment, something shifting behind her amber eyes, the earlier suspicion softening into something closer to genuine respect. "You're not what any of us expected, Daniel Marsh." They pressed onward through the remainder of the course, encountering smaller obstacles along the way, each one solved through Daniel's careful observation rather than raw predatory power. By the time the tower finally came into view through the thinning mist, the sun had dipped low toward the horizon, casting long orange shadows across the clearing, where dozens of other students had already gathered, many of them exhausted, some visibly injured from encounters with the forest's various trials. As Daniel, Ivy, and Liam emerged from the tree line together, a hush fell over the gathered crowd. Word of the encounter with Marcus Cade had already spread somehow, carried quickly by the same rumor networks that had spread news of Daniel's strange enrollment the night before. Students who had dismissed him as easy prey now watched him with a mixture of confusion, wariness, and something new entirely, the first flickers of respect. Marcus arrived shortly after, furious and disheveled, his earlier confidence replaced by simmering anger directed squarely at Daniel. He said nothing as he stormed past toward the tower, but the look he shot Daniel promised this encounter was far from finished. Professor Alaric Vane stood near the tower entrance, observing the returning students with quiet interest, his gaze lingering longest on Daniel. "An eventful first trial, I hear," he said as Daniel approached. "You could say that," Daniel replied, still slightly breathless. "The forest tests instinct," Alaric said thoughtfully. "You appear to possess a different kind of instinct entirely, one this academy has never quite had reason to measure before." Grace Ellis stood nearby, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression, already turning over new questions in her mind about exactly what Daniel Marsh truly was, and why the ancient enrollment crystal had been so certain he belonged among the most dangerous young predators in the world. That evening, as Daniel finally collapsed onto his bed, exhausted but strangely proud of surviving his first real test, he allowed himself a small, tired smile. He did not yet realize that his encounter with Marcus Cade had planted seeds of resentment that would grow into something far more dangerous in the weeks ahead. Nor did he realize that his quiet display of cleverness in the forest had caught the attention of far more than just his two new companions. Somewhere across the academy grounds, in a shadowed office lit only by a single flickering lamp, Professor Alaric Vane sat reviewing old, dust-covered records, searching for any mention in the Academy's ancient history of a bloodline that hunted not with claws or fire, but with patience, observation, and quiet, calculated intelligence. 3 weeks passed at Duskmore Academy, and Daniel Marsh had not been eaten, humiliated, or expelled, which by the Academy's usual standards for outsiders counted as a small miracle. Word of his performance in the orientation trial had spread through every dormitory wing, twisted and exaggerated with each retelling, until some students genuinely believed he had wrestled a bear with his bare hands, rather than simply outsmarted a handful of overconfident predators using birds and a well-placed branch. Daniel found the exaggerations mildly amusing, though he was careful never to correct anyone directly. Letting the rumors grow a little wilder seemed safer than explaining the truth to creatures who respected strength above almost everything else. Classes at the academy were unlike anything Daniel had ever imagined. Combat theory, advanced tracking, territorial law among ancient predator bloodlines, shifting control, a subject Daniel obviously could not participate in, though Professor Alaric Vane had quietly arranged for him to observe and take detailed notes instead, curious to see what patterns Daniel might notice that the shifting instructors themselves had overlooked. It was during one such observation session that Nora Fenwick first approached him. She was a lean, quick-eyed girl from a respected line of feline shifters, with sharp cheekbones and an easy, mischievous smile that rarely reached full sincerity. She dropped into the seat beside Daniel without asking permission, watching him scribble notes as two students practiced controlled partial shifts at the front of the training hall. "You've been busy," Nora said, glancing at the pages filled with Daniel's careful observations. "Half the school thinks you're secretly some kind of ancient predator in disguise. The other half thinks you're some kind of experiment gone wrong." "And what do you think?" Daniel asked, not looking up from his notes. "Honestly, I think you're just really good at not dying," Nora said with a shrug, "which around here might actually be more impressive than having claws." Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should," Nora said. "Not many humans get invited to the formal hunt trial." Daniel's pen paused mid-sentence. "The what?" Nora's grin widened, clearly enjoying the fact that she had information he did not. "The formal hunt trial. Biggest event of the semester. Top predator candidates from every bloodline compete in a real hunting exercise across the Academy's outer wilderness. It determines class rankings for the entire year. And somehow, your name just got added to the roster this morning." Daniel felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. How exactly does a human end up on a predator hunting roster? "No idea," Nora admitted, though something in her tone suggested she had a guess she wasn't sharing yet. "But I'd start preparing if I were you. This isn't like the orientation trial. This is the real thing." That evening, Daniel found Grace Ellis in her office, poring over old academy records with visible frustration etched across her face. When he explained what Nora had told him, Grace's expression darkened further. The formal hunt trial roster is determined by faculty vote, Grace explained, setting down the ancient ledger she had been examining. Someone specifically requested your inclusion. Any idea who? Daniel asked. Grace hesitated before answering. Professor Vane. Daniel blinked in surprise. Why would he do that? I can't hunt anything. I don't have claws, fangs, wings, or any kind of enhanced strength. Putting me in a real hunting trial against actual predators sounds less like a test and more like an execution. Alaric Vane does very little without careful reasoning behind it, Grace said slowly, choosing her words with obvious care. I believe he wants to see exactly what you're capable of under real pressure, not simulated pressure. And I believe, though I cannot prove it yet, that he suspects your presence here is not actually a mistake at all. Daniel sat with that unsettling thought long into the night, staring up at his dormitory ceiling, wondering exactly what kind of ancient bloodline might hunt without claws or fangs, and wondering, with growing dread, whether he would survive long enough to find out the answer. The morning of the formal hunt trial arrived cold and clear. The sky above the Academy's outer wilderness stretched pale and cloudless. Dozens of top predator candidates gathered at the starting line, each one representing the finest hunting bloodline their families could produce. Among them stood Marcus Cade, his cold gray eyes locking onto Daniel the moment he arrived, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across his face at the sight of his rival standing among the competitors. Didn't think you'd actually show up, Marcus said, sauntering closer. Guess someone up there decided you needed a proper lesson. Guess we'll find out, Daniel replied evenly, refusing to let Marcus see how nervous he actually felt. Ivy and Liam appeared at his side moments later, both dressed in the same reinforced training gear as the other competitors, having apparently entered the trial as well, whether out of loyalty or simple curiosity about how far Daniel could push this strange new reputation he had earned. We're not letting you do this alone, Ivy said firmly, cutting off any protest Daniel might have made. This isn't the kind of trial you talk your way out of, Liam added, his earlier calculating curiosity now mixed with something that looked almost like genuine concern. Real predators, real terrain, real stakes. You need people watching your back. Professor Alaric Vane addressed the gathered competitors from a raised platform, his calm voice carrying easily across the crisp morning air. The formal hunt trial tests not raw strength alone, but strategy, patience, and adaptability under genuine pressure. Somewhere within the outer wilderness, a marked target has been released. A swift, elusive creature, bred specifically for evasion. The first competitor to successfully track and capture the target, without causing it lasting harm, wins the trial and secures the highest class ranking for the remainder of the year. A ripple of excited murmurs passed through the crowd. Marcus cracked his knuckles, clearly confident in his chances against every other competitor present, human included. Competitors may work individually or in temporary alliances, Alaric continued. But be warned, the wilderness contains far more dangers than the marked target alone. Trust your instincts, and trust each other, wisely. The horn sounded, and the competitors scattered in every direction, disappearing into the thick tree line surrounding the training grounds. Daniel, Ivy, and Liam moved together, falling quickly into the same efficient rhythm they had developed during the orientation trial weeks earlier. Any idea what kind of creature we're actually hunting? Daniel asked as they navigated a rocky ravine. Something bred for speed and evasion, Liam said. Probably something small, fast, and smart enough to avoid obvious traps. Daniel considered this carefully. Then, chasing it directly is probably a losing strategy. Every predator out here is going to try outrunning or outsensing it. We need a different approach. Such as? Ivy asked. We think like the creature instead of like the hunters, Daniel said. If it's smart enough to avoid obvious traps, it's probably avoiding open ground entirely, sticking close to cover, and staying near water sources for cover scent. Instead of chasing it, we predict where it's heading, and get there first. Ivy exchanged a glance with Liam, both clearly impressed despite themselves. They adjusted course based on Daniel's reasoning, moving toward a distant stream that cut through a dense section of forest, rather than following the scattered footprints and broken branches most other competitors were currently chasing across open terrain. Their patience paid off faster than expected, Crouched low near a cluster of thick roots along the stream bank, Daniel spotted a flash of movement, a sleek, silver-furred creature darting between shadows with astonishing speed, clearly the marked target Alaric had described. Before Daniel could suggest a plan, Ivy was already moving, her body rippling with barely contained energy, as her wolf instincts urged her toward an immediate chase. "Wait," Daniel whispered urgently, grabbing her arm. "If you chase it directly, it'll bolt into open ground where a dozen other predators are waiting to intercept it. Let it come to us instead." Ivy hesitated, every predatory instinct screaming at her to give chase, but something in Daniel's steady confidence made her pause. She nodded reluctantly, forcing herself to remain still. Daniel studied the surrounding terrain quickly, noting the narrow gap between two large boulders just ahead of the creature's current path, the only clear route through the dense underbrush lining the stream bank. Using quiet hand signals, he directed Liam to circle wide and approach from behind, gently pressuring the creature forward without startling it into a full panic sprint. The plan worked almost perfectly. The silver-furred creature, sensing Liam's careful approach from behind, darted forward exactly as Daniel had predicted, straight toward the narrow gap between the boulders. Daniel, having already positioned himself there with a length of soft rope borrowed from the trial equipment, timed his movement with careful precision, looping the rope gently around the creature the moment it passed, securing it without causing any harm. For a moment, the three of them simply stared at the captured creature in stunned silence, hardly believing their plan had actually worked. "We did it," Ivy said, disbelief coloring her voice. "We actually did it." Their celebration was interrupted by the sudden crash of heavy footsteps through the underbrush. Marcus Cade emerged from the tree line, breathing hard, his expression twisting from surprise into furious disbelief as he took in the sight of the captured creature secured safely in Daniel's hands. "That's not possible," Marcus snarled. "You didn't even chase it. You didn't track it. You just waited?" "We predicted where it would go," Daniel said calmly, refusing to be intimidated by Marcus's obvious rage. "Sometimes the best hunt isn't about being faster than your target. It's about understanding it better than anyone else does." Marcus's hands clenched into fists, his composure cracking visibly under the humiliation of losing to the very human he had mocked weeks earlier. "This is a joke. A human doesn't outhunt a bloodline predator. It's not possible." "Apparently it is," Liam said, unable to keep a note of satisfaction from his voice. "Looks like the rankings are about to get very interesting this year." Marcus stormed away without another word, his fury practically radiating off him in waves, leaving Daniel, Ivy, and Liam alone with their captured target, and the growing realization that this victory, however satisfying, had just made Daniel's already complicated situation at Duskmoor Academy significantly more dangerous. The return to the academy grounds felt like walking into a completely different world than the one Daniel had left that morning. News of the trial's outcome had somehow already spread ahead of them, and as they emerged from the wilderness, carrying the successfully captured target, a stunned silence fell over the gathered crowd of students and faculty alike. Professor Alaric Vane stepped forward, studying Daniel with an expression that mixed genuine surprise with something closer to deep, careful calculation. "A human," he said slowly, addressing the crowd without taking his eyes off Daniel, "has just outperformed every predator bloodline candidate in this year's formal hunt trial." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, disbelief mixing with grudging admiration, and, in more than a few faces, open resentment. Daniel felt the weight of every stare pressing down on him, and for the first time since arriving at Duskmoor Academy, he understood with startling clarity that his position here had shifted permanently. He was no longer simply prey, mistakenly wandering among predators. He had become something else entirely, something the Academy's ancient hierarchy had never encountered before, and something that many of its most dangerous students were now determined to understand, control, or eliminate entirely. That night, as celebrations quietly buzzed through certain corners of the dormitory wings, Grace Ellis found Alaric Vane standing alone in the Academy's oldest archive room, surrounded by towering shelves of ancient, dust-covered texts. "You suspected this would happen," Grace said, not quite a question. Alaric did not look up from the fragile, yellowed pages spread across the table before him. "I suspected something. I did not expect confirmation quite this quickly." Grace stepped closer, glancing down at the ancient text Alaric had been studying, an old, half-forgotten record describing a rare and nearly extinct bloodline, one said to hunt, not through claws or supernatural speed, but through unmatched patience, observation, and strategic intelligence, qualities the old texts described as far more dangerous, in their own way, than any set of fangs or wings. "You think Daniel Marsh might be connected to this?" Grace said quietly. "I think," Alaric replied slowly, finally looking up from the ancient pages, "that this academy may have made a far smaller mistake than any of us originally believed." In the days following the formal Hunt trial, Daniel Marsh became the single most discussed topic across every corner of Duskmoor Academy. Some students began greeting him with cautious respect in the hallways, offering small nods or brief acknowledgments they would never have considered giving a human weeks earlier. Others watched him with narrowed eyes and folded arms, clearly unwilling to accept that someone without claws, fangs, wings, or any obvious supernatural gift had outperformed the Academy's finest predator bloodlines during one of its most important trials. Marcus Cade fell firmly into the second category, and his humiliation had curdled into something far colder and more calculating than simple anger. He spent his evenings gathering a small circle of like-minded students, all of them convinced that Daniel's success had somehow cheated the natural order the Academy was built upon, and all of them determined to prove, once and for all, exactly how fragile a human truly was when faced with real predatory instinct. Daniel remained mostly unaware of the storm quietly gathering around him, too focused on adjusting to his growing academic workload and the strange new reality of his life at Duskmoor. Ivy and Liam had become something closer to genuine friends than simple trial partners, often finding him during meals or free periods, sharing academy gossip, complaining about difficult professors, and slowly filling in the gaps of his understanding about the hidden world he had accidentally stumbled into. "You've been getting a lot of attention lately," Ivy commented one afternoon as the three of them sat beneath a large tree near the Academy's central courtyard, watching younger students practice basic combat drills nearby. Some of it good, some of it not so good. "I've noticed," Daniel admitted, glancing toward a group of students who quickly looked away when he caught their eyes. Marcus especially. "He looks at me like he's planning something." "He probably is," Liam said, his earlier playful tone replaced by genuine seriousness. "Marcus doesn't handle embarrassment well. His family has a long, proud hunting legacy, and losing to a human in front of the entire academy hit that pride pretty hard." "Should I be worried?" Daniel asked. Ivy and Liam exchanged a brief, uncertain glance. "Probably," Ivy admitted honestly. "Just be careful. Don't wander anywhere alone after dark, especially near the lower training grounds." Daniel nodded, filing the warning away carefully, though he couldn't shake a small, stubborn feeling that he had already survived far worse than an embarrassed rival with wounded pride. That feeling was tested sooner than he expected. Nearly a week later, Daniel found himself walking back from the library alone, after a particularly demanding evening study session, the academy grounds quiet and shadowed under a thin crescent moon. He knew better than to take the shortcut past the lower training grounds, but the direct path back to his dormitory wing was considerably longer, and exhaustion made the shorter route tempting despite every warning he had received. He made it nearly halfway across the training grounds before he sensed something was wrong. The usual quiet of the evening felt too still, too deliberate, and a faint prickling sensation crawled up the back of his neck, the same instinct that had kept him alive through difficult situations long before he ever arrived at Duskmoor Academy. "Going somewhere, human?" Marcus Cade stepped out from behind a cluster of training equipment, flanked by 4 other students Daniel recognized vaguely from around campus, all of them wearing expressions that made it clear this encounter had been carefully planned, rather than accidental. Daniel's heart pounded, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "Long day. Just heading back to my dorm." "Funny," Marcus said, slowly circling closer, "because I could have sworn we told you to avoid this area at night." "Guess I forgot," Daniel said, already calculating distances, exits, and terrain features. The same instinctive process that had saved him during every previous trial. "Here's the thing," Marcus continued, his voice low and dangerous. "Everyone at this academy has spent weeks pretending you're something special, some kind of rare bloodline nobody's ever heard of. But I don't believe that for a second. I think you're exactly what you look like. A human who got lucky twice. And tonight, we're going to find out exactly how lucky you really are. The 4 students flanking Marcus began spreading out, slowly closing the distance, clearly intending to surround Daniel completely, before he had any real chance to escape. Daniel's mind raced, cataloging every possible advantage the terrain offered, the loose gravel scattered near his feet, the tall equipment racks casting long shadows across the ground, the narrow gap between 2 storage sheds just visible at the edge of his vision. "This really isn't necessary," Daniel said, backing slowly toward the gap between the sheds, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I disagree," Marcus said, and then, without further warning, he lunged. What happened next unfolded in a blur of chaos. Daniel dove sideways, narrowly avoiding Marcus's initial charge, using the momentum to scramble toward the narrow gap between the storage sheds, a space far too tight for someone Marcus's size to follow easily. One of Marcus's companions, quicker and smaller, attempted to cut off Daniel's escape route, moving with a burst of predatory speed no ordinary human could hope to match. Thinking fast, Daniel grabbed a loose length of rope hanging from a nearby equipment rack and yanked hard, causing an entire stack of heavy training weights to tumble loudly across the pursuing student's path. The student, caught off guard by the sudden noise and obstruction, stumbled awkwardly, twisting an ankle badly enough to collapse with a sharp cry of pain. The sudden chaos gave Daniel just enough time to slip through the narrow gap between the sheds, emerging on the opposite side, breathless but unharmed. Marcus's furious shouts echoed behind him as Daniel sprinted across the open grounds toward the brightly lit safety of the main academy building, his lungs burning, his heart pounding wildly against his ribs. By the time Daniel reached the safety of the entrance hall, Professor Grace Ellis was already there, alerted by the commotion, her expression shifting from concern to controlled fury, as Daniel quickly explained what had happened. "This ends now," Grace said sharply, already moving toward the door. "Regardless of enrollment law, deliberate attacks on another student cannot be ignored." The aftermath unfolded quickly. Marcus and his companions were summoned before Professor Alaric Vane that same night, along with Daniel, Grace, and the injured student, whose twisted ankle, though painful, thankfully proved to be a minor injury rather than anything more serious. Alaric's expression remained carefully neutral as he listened to the full account of the evening's events, though a quiet, simmering disappointment was clearly visible beneath his calm exterior. Deliberate ambush of a fellow student, regardless of species or bloodline, violates the most basic principles this academy was founded upon, he said finally, his voice cold and measured. "Marcus Cade, you will face formal disciplinary review before the Academy Council." Marcus's jaw clenched, fury and humiliation warring visibly across his face, but he said nothing, clearly aware that further protest would only worsen his situation. "As for you, Daniel Marsh," Alaric continued, turning his attention fully toward Daniel, "your ability to navigate tonight's encounter without inflicting serious harm on your attackers, despite having every reasonable justification to do so, speaks volumes about the nature of whatever bloodline you may ultimately prove to carry." Daniel wasn't entirely sure how to respond to that, so he simply nodded, still catching his breath from the night's chaos. After Marcus and the others were dismissed, Grace lingered behind, watching Alaric with quiet concern. "This is escalating faster than expected," she said. "If tonight had gone even slightly differently, Daniel could have been seriously hurt." "I'm aware," Alaric said grimly, "which is why our investigation into his true nature can no longer wait." Over the following days, Alaric and Grace worked tirelessly through the Academy's oldest archives, cross-referencing ancient bloodline records against every scrap of information available about Daniel's family history. Meanwhile, Daniel found himself growing steadily closer to both Ivy and Liam, their earlier cautious alliance deepening into something that felt increasingly like genuine friendship, and, in Ivy's case, something that occasionally made Daniel's heart race in ways that had nothing to do with danger at all. "You scared me half to death when I heard what happened," Ivy admitted one evening, sitting beside Daniel on a stone bench overlooking the Academy's central courtyard, her earlier suspicion long since replaced by open concern. "Marcus and his group could have seriously hurt you." "I'm tougher than I look," Daniel said, offering a small, tired smile. "Clearly," Ivy said, though her voice carried genuine worry beneath the light teasing. "Still, promise me you'll be more careful. I don't know what I'd do if something actually happened to you." Daniel studied her for a long moment, something warm and unfamiliar settling in his chest, despite the exhaustion of the past few days. "I promise," he said quietly. Liam, watching the exchange from a short distance away, allowed himself a small, knowing smile, quietly pleased to see the growing bond between his two closest friends, even as he remained watchful for any further danger that Marcus or his allies might attempt in the future. Word of Marcus's failed ambush spread quickly through the academy, further shifting the way most students viewed Daniel. Where he had once been dismissed as an amusing anomaly or an easy target, he was now increasingly regarded as something far more complicated, a human who had not only survived direct predator aggression, but had done so without causing serious harm, a level of restraint and control many predator students privately admitted they weren't certain they could have matched themselves. Deep within the Academy's oldest archive room, late one night, Grace Ellis finally uncovered a fragile, centuries-old text describing an obscure and nearly forgotten bloodline, one whose members had reportedly walked among ancient predator societies without ever developing claws, fangs, or supernatural strength of their own, relying instead on unmatched intelligence, patience, and an almost supernatural ability to understand and outmaneuver predator instinct itself. "Alaric," Grace called softly, her voice tight with barely contained excitement. "I think I found something." Alaric crossed the room quickly, studying the ancient text over her shoulder, his calm expression finally cracking into something closer to genuine astonishment as he read the faded, careful script describing a bloodline history that matched Daniel Marsh's unusual abilities with startling precision. "If this is accurate," Alaric said slowly, "then Daniel Marsh is not a mistake at all. He may be the last known descendant of a bloodline this academy has not seen in nearly 3 centuries. News of Grace Ellis's discovery moved through the highest levels of Duskmore Academy with unusual speed, though careful discretion kept the details from spreading among the general student body for the time being. Professor Alaric Vane called an emergency meeting of the Academy Council, presenting the fragile ancient text alongside detailed records of Daniel's performance during both the orientation trial and the formal hunt, along with careful notes describing his unusual instincts, his precise observational skills, and his consistent ability to outmaneuver far stronger opponents without relying on any conventional predatory strength. The council members, a group of senior faculty representing the Academy's oldest and most respected bloodlines, listened with a mixture of skepticism and cautious interest. Few of them had ever heard of the bloodline described in Grace's discovery, an ancient lineage referred to only as the Wardens of the Old Hunt, a nearly extinct family line said to have once served as balance keepers among early predator societies, using intelligence and strategic mastery to prevent stronger bloodlines from hunting each other into extinction during centuries long past. "If this is accurate," one council member said slowly, studying the ancient text with obvious fascination, "the enrollment crystal did not make a mistake at all. It recognized something none of us were equipped to identify." Alaric nodded gravely, which raises an important question. What do we do now? The council's debate stretched long into the evening, weighing Academy tradition against the undeniable evidence gathered over the past several weeks. Some argued strongly for immediate, formal recognition of Daniel's bloodline, eager to correct the Academy's initial oversight. Others remained hesitant, wary of disrupting centuries of established hierarchy by officially welcoming a bloodline so fundamentally different from every other student currently enrolled. Ultimately, the council reached a decision. Rather than simply declaring Daniel's status through quiet administrative changes, they would hold a formal reclassification trial, a rare and ancient Academy tradition, reserved for situations exactly like this one, allowing Daniel the opportunity to demonstrate his bloodline's true nature before the entire student body and faculty, settling the matter definitively and publicly. Daniel received the news the following morning, summoned once again to Alaric's office, where Grace stood waiting alongside the headmaster, both wearing expressions that mixed seriousness with something closer to quiet excitement. "A reclassification trial," Daniel repeated slowly, processing the unfamiliar term. "What exactly does that involve?" A structured challenge, Alaric explained, designed specifically to test the core abilities of your suspected bloodline, rather than measuring you against standard predator trials. If successful, your place within this academy will be formally and permanently recognized, no longer under suspicion or scrutiny. And if I'm not successful? Daniel asked carefully. Alaric's expression softened slightly. Then we will have at least given you a fair and proper chance to prove yourself, rather than leaving your fate permanently uncertain. Daniel absorbed this information slowly, a strange mixture of nervous anticipation and cautious hope settling in his chest. After everything he had already survived at Duskmoor Academy, the idea of one final, decisive trial felt almost fitting. News of the upcoming reclassification trial spread through the academy within hours, sparking intense curiosity and heated debate among the student body. Some students eagerly anticipated finally learning the truth about Daniel's strange abilities. Others, Marcus Cade chief among them, viewed the announcement with renewed determination to see Daniel fail publicly and decisively. "You're actually happy about this?" Ivy asked incredulously as she, Daniel, and Liam sat together the evening before the trial, Daniel's nervous energy palpable despite his attempts to hide it. "Happy might be a strong word," Daniel admitted, "but at least this way, everyone finally gets a clear answer. No more rumors. No more uncertainty. Just whatever the truth actually turns out to be. For what it's worth," Liam said, "whatever bloodline you actually belong to, it clearly makes you smarter and more resourceful than half the predators in this academy, myself included, most days." Ivy reached over and gently squeezed Daniel's hand, a small, simple gesture that nonetheless sent his heart racing far more than any predator ambush ever had. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said softly, "you've already proven you belong here. No trial changes that." Daniel managed a small, grateful smile, though sleep proved difficult to find that night, as nervous anticipation kept his mind racing long into the early hours of the morning. The reclassification trial began at dawn, held within a specially prepared section of the Academy's outer wilderness, transformed overnight into an elaborate testing ground, filled with subtle environmental challenges designed specifically to measure patience, observation, strategic planning, and controlled restraint. The exact qualities Ulrich and Grace's research suggested defined the ancient Warden bloodline. A massive crowd gathered to watch, students and faculty alike, lining the elevated viewing platforms surrounding the testing grounds. Daniel stood alone at the trial's starting point, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes watching his every move, including the cold, calculating gaze of Marcus Cade, positioned prominently among the senior students. Alaric addressed the gathered crowd from the central platform. "Today's trial will test 3 core principles, believed central to the Warden bloodline: observation, strategic patience, and the wisdom to achieve victory without unnecessary harm. Daniel Marsh will face a series of escalating challenges within the wilderness, each one designed to test these principles under increasing pressure. The first challenge unfolded almost immediately as Daniel entered the wilderness, a maze of shifting stone corridors, designed to disorient anyone relying purely on instinct or memorized pathways. Daniel moved through it slowly and deliberately, carefully studying subtle variations in stone texture, faint air currents, and barely perceptible sound echoes to methodically map the correct path forward, avoiding every false turn with steady, calculated precision. The second challenge tested restraint directly, presenting Daniel with a controlled, simulated predator encounter, a large, illusion-crafted creature designed to charge aggressively toward him, testing whether his instinct would be to fight, flee, or find some clever alternative solution entirely. Rather than engaging directly, Daniel calmly identified the illusion's projection source hidden within nearby rock formations and simply stepped outside its effective range, neutralizing the entire challenge without any confrontation whatsoever, a solution that visibly startled several observing faculty members. The final and most difficult challenge awaited Daniel deep within the heart of the testing grounds, a complex, multi-layered puzzle requiring him to navigate a series of interconnected obstacles while simultaneously avoiding detection from patrolling illusion-crafted guardians, all while under strict time pressure as the sun climbed steadily toward its highest point in the sky. Daniel approached the challenge with the same careful, methodical patience that had guided him through every previous obstacle since his very first day at Duskmoor Academy. He studied the Guardian patrol patterns carefully, noting subtle timing gaps between their movements, identifying safe pathways through careful observation, rather than reckless guessing. When one particularly difficult section seemed to offer no clear solution, Daniel paused, studying the terrain from multiple angles, until he finally noticed a narrow ledge overlooked by every previous trial competitor, allowing him to bypass the section entirely, through careful, unconventional thinking. As Daniel finally emerged from the testing grounds, successfully completing the final challenge with over 20 minutes remaining before the trial's strict time limit, a stunned silence fell across the watching crowd, quickly followed by an eruption of astonished applause and excited murmurs rippling through the gathered students and faculty. Professor Alaric Vane stepped forward, his expression carrying a rare, unguarded warmth as he addressed the crowd. Daniel Marsh has successfully completed every challenge of the reclassification trial, demonstrating precisely the qualities long associated with the ancient Warden bloodline. Effective immediately, Daniel Marsh is formally and permanently recognized as a full student of Duskmoor Academy, carrying the rare and respected lineage of the Wardens of the Old Hunt. The crowd's reaction shifted rapidly, from stunned silence to genuine celebration, many students who had once dismissed or mocked Daniel, now cheering enthusiastically, eager to align themselves with the Academy's newest and most surprising success story. Ivy and Liam rushed forward the moment the crowd began to disperse, both wrapping Daniel in an enthusiastic embrace, relief and pride evident on both their faces. "You did it," Ivy said, laughing with genuine happiness. "You actually did it." "I told you," Liam added, grinning widely. "Smartest predator in this academy, hands down." Marcus Cade watched the celebration from a distance, his expression unreadable, though something in his posture suggested a grudging, reluctant respect finally settling into place beneath his lingering resentment. He said nothing as he turned and walked away, but he offered no further challenges toward Daniel in the weeks that followed, apparently having finally accepted the undeniable truth of what the enrollment crystal had recognized from the very beginning. In the days following the reclassification trial, Daniel's life at Duskmoor Academy settled into something resembling genuine normalcy, or at least as close to normal as life could be while attending school, alongside dragon heirs, wolf packs, and countless other ancient predator bloodlines. His growing friendship with Ivy blossomed into something clearly deeper, the two of them spending increasing amounts of time together, much to Liam's amused and frequent teasing. His bond with Liam solidified into genuine, easy friendship, the earlier calculating curiosity long since replaced by loyal camaraderie. Professor Grace Ellis, reflecting on the entire situation one quiet evening in her office, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile as she reviewed Daniel's official academy file, now permanently updated to reflect his true bloodline status. "Strange how the universe works sometimes," she murmured to herself. "A simple clerical error, and an entire academy's understanding of what makes a true predator gets turned completely upside down." Alaric, standing nearby, nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps it wasn't truly an error at all. Perhaps this academy simply needed reminding that strength comes in far more forms than claws, fangs, or fire. Weeks later, as the academy settled into the comfortable rhythm of ongoing classes and routine training exercises, Daniel found himself walking through the same grand entrance hall where he had first arrived, nervous and utterly unaware of the world he was stepping into. Students who once eyed him with suspicion or open hostility now greeted him with friendly nods, some even seeking him out specifically for advice on strategic thinking and careful observation, techniques the Academy's more traditional predator training had never fully emphasized before. Ivy fell into step beside him, slipping her hand comfortably into his, while Liam jogged up from behind, still finishing a large breakfast pastry he had somehow managed to sneak from the dining hall. "You know," Liam said between bites, "when Vane first brought you here, half the school thought you'd last maybe a week before someone accidentally turned you into a very unfortunate lesson in predator instinct." "And now?" Daniel asked, smiling. "Now," Ivy said, squeezing his hand affectionately, "half the school is terrified of you, and the other half wants to be your best friend." Daniel laughed. genuinely happy for what felt like the first time since stepping through those intimidating academy gates weeks earlier. He still didn't fully understand every strange, ancient tradition of Duskmoor Academy, and he certainly hadn't developed claws, fangs, or wings of his own. But he had found something far more valuable than raw predatory strength within these walls: genuine friendship, quiet respect, and an unshakable sense that, mistake or not, he truly belonged exactly where he had somehow, impossibly, ended up. As the three of them continued down the sunlit hallway together, laughing and trading playful jokes about the chaotic weeks behind them, none of the surrounding students dared approach Daniel with anything less than genuine friendliness, a stark contrast to the wary, hostile glances that had greeted him during his very first day. Somewhere nearby, still smarting quietly over his earlier humiliation, Marcus Cade watched the trio pass by, offering nothing more than a stiff, reluctant nod of acknowledgement before turning away. Daniel Marsh, once mistakenly enrolled among the most dangerous young predators in the world, had proven, definitively and unforgettably, that not every apex hunter needed claws or fangs to be feared, respected, and remembered throughout Duskmoor Academy's long and storied history.